After months of speculation, he's gone.
I have, therefore, this morning, resigned as the BBC chair to the Secretary of State and to the board.
But Richard Sharp leaves behind two questions. Why did it take so long? And should we now change the way his replacement is chosen?
This is bigger than a BBC story. This is a story about the whole public appointments process. It is frankly rotten to the core.
So is there any chance of real change? Anushka will be here to discuss the issue tonight. Also on News at 10. The government says British nationals in Sudan have until tomorrow at midday to reach the extraction point. The crumbling Himalayan town where the writing is sadly, but literally, on the wall.
The people here talk about more extreme weather, torrential rains leading to more landslides, more flash floods. There's a toxic mixture of things to blame.
Vindicated, the actress Ava Green wins her lawsuit against a doomed sci-fi film, and Vogue makes history once again.
I think a part of me wants to sit with the physical product, flick through every page, probably sniff it really weirdly, and
I smell them too,
and to just feel that it's real.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. As the crisis engulfing the BBC and its soon-to-be former chairman, Richard Sharp, has played out, it's hard not to be reminded of that old adage. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Who Mr. Sharp knew, namely former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and his failure to make known the fine details of their relationship, specifically his role in helping Mr. Johnson secure a loan of a mere £800,000, resulted in his resignation today. Falling on his sword spared another of his contacts, the current PM, the job of sacking him. Rishi Sunak must now head up the task of replacing Mr. Sharp. But should that really be his decision? Gary Lineker, who does seem to have got something of a taste for testing his bosses, said it should not be. And he's far from alone. Before the process has even begun, it's controversial.
It's an organisation that usually reports on what's happening across the country and world. But in recent months, the BBC has had to turn its focus inwards.
The chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, resigns after breaching the rules on public appointments.
A report today accused Richard Sharp of failing to declare key information about his links to government when he was appointed to the chairmanship.
I've always maintained the breach was inadvertent and not material. Nevertheless, I have decided that it is right to prioritise the interest of the BBC. I feel that this matter may well be a distraction from the corporation's good work were I to remain in post until the end of my term.
The issue came down to Richard Sharp's relationship with Boris Johnson.
Did Mr. Sharp help you with your loan?
And failure to disclose his role in helping the former Prime Minister secure an £800,000 loan. After an investigation, Adam Heppenstall KC concluded there is a risk of a perception that Mr. Sharp was recommended for appointment because he assisted the former Prime Minister in a private financial matter. They might also perceive that he was putting himself in a position where he might, if appointed, be beholden to the Prime Minister for his support, such that his independence from government was compromised.
He should have been sacked weeks ago. It was clear for everyone to see that he had failed to act appropriately in the process, and it has caused untold damage to the reputation and the independence of the BBC.
There are questions today not just about the findings of this report, but about the entire system and how it is that the rules say it is fine for the Prime Minister to appoint a close friend and party donor to a job as big as BBC chair. And that isn't new. Gavin Davies, BBC chair from 2001 to 2004, was a former Labour advisor close to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Lord Patten, who took up the role in 2011, was a former Conservative Party chair. For Richard Sharp, it's not just a link to Boris Johnson. He was also once the boss of another high-profile politician. So why didn't Rishi Sunak sack him earlier?
This is about doing things properly and professionally, and when concerns are raised, it's right that there is a proper process, an independent process.
Can I ask you about the wider system? There is no rule to stop the Prime Minister appointing a good friend or a party donor to chair the BBC, is there?
Look, this is bigger than a BBC story. This is a story about the whole public appointments process. It is frankly rotten to the core. It is ministers who decide who the candidates will be. It's ministers who decide which one to choose. And the panel who interviews them isn't even entitled to tell ministers who is the best one for the job.
All of this follows a period of intense controversy for the BBC after it took its biggest star, Gary Lineker, off air because of controversial comments he made about government policy.
Goodbye.
Today he tweeted, "The BBC chairman should not be selected by the government of the day. Not now, not ever." But tonight, it's clear that the government and this Prime Minister will decide who becomes the next chair of the BBC.
And Anishka is here to talk about all this. So I'm smiling because you can't help feeling Gary Lineker is rather enjoying testing his bosses on a daily basis at the moment. But that's probably a different story. Let's just deal with this. We should make clear this is not about this government. Every government that, you know, appoints chairs of the BBC, usually or often party supporters or party members. I mean, it seems odd, doesn't it, to a lot of people?
Yeah, it seems very odd, the idea that the Prime Minister might handpick the chair of a major news organisation which is meant to be completely independent. But I think it is worth thinking about why is it that ministers are involved in this process. It's because the BBC is a public body. It is one of actually over 300 public bodies. They spend between them over £200 billion in public money. And so the argument for ministers' involvement is that there needs to be some sort of democratic accountability about the chairs of these different organisations. But, you know, clearly there has been a lot of controversy around this. Now, I speak to senior people within the BBC or who used to work within the BBC, and they say exactly what you pointed out at the beginning. Richard Sharp was not the exception, he was the rule, at least as far as the political appointment nature of it. And they say, actually, he had almost no overall influence over news. But that's kind of not the point here. The point is about perception, and that's what this report makes clear. If people do not trust the BBC, then that is a very big problem. And that's why experts call for things like limiting the role of ministers so that there is a more independent process to actually recommend who takes the job in the end.
Will today and the report into this change anything then, do you think?
Well, I don't think it's going to change the overall system, including a change that we already saw in 2016, which gave less power to the panels who actually do the interviewing. They can only say whether a person is appointable or not appointable. They don't actually recommend an individual anymore. No suggestion from government they want to change that. But Rishi Sunak will pay attention to some of the criticisms in today's report. For example, there were leaks ahead of Richard Sharp's appointment that said he was the Prime Minister's favourite. That stopped other people, perhaps, from applying from the role in the first place. It made it a much more difficult process. I am told by those in government that Rishi Sunak will look at issues like that and will try to make sure they don't happen as he now looks for the next BBC chair.
OK, Nishka, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's move on to events in Sudan. And after last night's ceasefire extension, the government here has set its own deadline for getting British nationals out of the country. With more than 1,500 people evacuated, any that remain have until midday tomorrow to reach the official extraction point. After that, they'll have to find their own route to safety. And whilst the ceasefire may be in place, gunfire continues to ring out in the streets.
A new three-day ceasefire, yet the Sudanese capital is still burning. This ceasefire only means that the guns have fallen more silent. It doesn't mean that they've been completely silenced. The lull in the fighting has meant the scale of needs in Sudan have been laid bare. A lack of fuel and a lack of food. There are no supplies, this man said. We are not receiving new goods, no flour. There is nothing coming in. Foreign nationals, including British citizens, continue to flee any way they can, not just through the RAF flights taking off from a base close to the Sudanese capital, but also by boat through Port Sudan. Evacuees continue to arrive here in Djibouti as well, brought by the Canadian government. Hadil Maktuba Jaib was rescued along with her young daughter.
How was it trying to get out of the city?
It was very difficult, very sadful, situation is very disaster. my family left the Khartoum, and my dad just brought me to the station of evacuation, and alhamdulillah.
Just to go to the airport, it's gonna cost you more than $500. And the second thing, it's not safe at all. The situation in Khartoum is very critical. It's very dangerous.
Ahmed also witnessed the British evacuation operations.
They are doing a good job. So yesterday, I think there have 2 flights, and a lot of UK people were there in the airports.
Having been slow to catch up with other evacuation operations by Western powers, the Deputy Prime Minister has now said the UK's efforts had paid dividends and would soon come to an end.
What we have seen over the past 24 hours or so is a significant decline in the British nationals coming forward. Now, that's what you'd expect. It's what's happened with other countries. So what we are saying now is that people should expect within the next 24 hours, so by 6 o'clock UK time tomorrow, for us to cease those flights.
People continue to leave through any safe exit. One of those is the border to Egypt, where hundreds are trying to cross every day. Testament to the fact that many believe the fighting will resume with a vengeance eventually, despite this temporary extension of the ceasefire. And those Britons who don't reach the designated airfield in the next 12 hours will have to make their own way out, or if they choose, stay in Sudan. Ragioma, News at 10, Djibouti.
Here, there's now a clear divide between unions on whether to accept the pay deal offered to NHS staff. It's a split which has given ministers confidence that the 5% offer can be implemented. For while relations with the Royal College of Nursing have plummeted ahead of a further strike starting on Sunday, members of the GMB union today backed the deal. And that matters because it means unions representing the majority of health workers now support it.
The NHS has never witnessed a winter like it. Months of placards, picket lines and anger about pay. But today, there was another boost for the government.
In voting to accept the offer, our members recognise that progress has been made. From the government originally offering nothing, health workers will be thousands of pounds better off.
The government offered NHS workers represented by a number of unions a one-off payment worth on average just over £2,700, as well as a 5% pay increase for this coming year. Along with members of the GMB union, Unison had already voted to accept it, as has the Royal College of Midwives and the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. But the pay dispute is far from over. Today, the Unite union has rejected the deal, adding to the Society of Radiographers and the Royal College of Nursing, who did so earlier this month. One of their members is Bert Roman, who cares for cancer patients at a London hospital. The staff nurse rejected the government's pay offer and will strike on Sunday and Monday, along with other nurses in parts of England.
Do you feel guilty about the patients that have their procedures postponed and their appointments because of these strikes?
I feel guilty going to a normal shift where 75% of the time I'm coming into a shift where I'm understaffed. We got to a point that I can't do my job properly anymore. And I'm struggling to pay my bills.
The RCN strike is expected to be the most challenging for the NHS yet. For the first time, the walkout will involve nurses in emergency departments, intensive care and on cancer wards. That led to Great Ormond Street Hospital declaring an incident today because of serious concerns about staff shortages.
Literally this afternoon, the RCN have issued a statement which seemingly would suggest they will consider derogations or safety mitigations in order to give us more staff over the weekend, and so we can approach our staff to come back in. But it was a very worrying position this morning and not one that I've encountered before.
The pay deal is likely to be implemented. Now a majority of unions have accepted it, which has been welcomed by the government. But the disruption is far from over. Members of Unite and the RCN who rejected the deal will walk out again, and junior doctors haven't even started their negotiations. Amy Lewis, News at 10.
As Amy was saying, it would be wrong to suggest today's decision by the GMB marks an end to the dispute between the government and the unions. There was a fresh reminder of that from teaching unions earlier. 4 of them in England said they'll join forces in future strikes, a decision which could potentially cause widespread disruption this autumn. The National Education Union says up to 400,000 teachers could be involved, but it's currently the only one with a mandate to strike. Excuse me. In Ukraine, a wave of Russian missile attacks across the country have killed at least 23 people. Most of those who died were in an apartment building in the central city of Uman, with children among the dead. Kyiv was also hit for the first time in nearly 2 months. President Zelensky described those responsible for the attacks as absolute evil. Russia's defense ministry said it had targeted Ukrainian military reserve units. In the sacred Himalayan town of Joshimath, red X's mark the spot where hundreds of homes are condemned to collapse as the sloped landscape slowly falls away beneath the feet of its inhabitants. India may be about to rise above China to become the world's most populous nation, but the sinking community is evidence of the cracks opening up under the weight of humanity. Exactly why their hillside home is crumbling is hotly disputed. The destabilizing effects of construction projects and climate change are the prime suspects. Whatever the truth, though, is the mistakes of the past are debated. When it comes to Joshimath's future, the writing is quite literally on the wall.
Given India's population, getting away from it all is not easy, but the foothills of the Himalayas have traditionally offered that possibility. The scenery is majestic, but this landscape is fragile, a fact underlined by the slow death of the most important town up here, a place that's away from it all no longer. In Joshimath, the cracks first appeared in November 2021. Today, more than 900 buildings are falling apart. A quarter of homes are condemned. Hundreds of the town's people have had to move into hotels. During the day, many return to their fractured houses because of the ties that bind. Some don't dare go inside and position themselves for a quick getaway should this slow-motion disaster suddenly speed up. The probable causes range from insufficiently regulated development projects, including blasting, to the effects of climate change. The people here talk about more extreme weather, torrential rains leading to more landslides, more flash floods. There's a toxic mixture of things to blame. Pavitra helped build the house that she, her husband and their 3 children were forced to abandon in January. It bears the red X, which means it's condemned to never being her home ever again. Considering the condition of the house, we don't have a future here. I'm worried about my children and their education. But right now I feel traumatized by my cracked home and the broken ground beneath it. Joshimath's history dates back to the 8th century. It's a tourist attraction and a strategic asset, just 60 miles from the Tibetan border and the Chinese soldiers stationed there. Every day, residents stage protests to try to persuade the Indian government to act quickly to save their town.
The situation is so grave. If this time they don't take some action or strict action against all these things, then we are losing a town which is very historic, which is culturally very rich.
The situation here looks more precarious by the day. The threat of the town's collapse is a constant one. It may have a storied past, but probably not much of a future. John Irvine, News at 10, Joshimath, Northern India.
In most circumstances, a delayed delivery is at worst an inconvenience, but for anyone waiting their arrival of vital medication, it can be critical. Well, we've heard from patients awaiting deliveries by Sciences, a company paid millions a year by the NHS to supply medication. Left without their drugs because of some lengthy delays, they say they've suffered terrible physical and mental consequences. And on top of that, the failures are putting extra pressure on an already strained NHS.
I basically didn't have use of one of my hands. My fingers were so swollen. I was in a lot of pain.
Sam Brown relies on the company that delivers the drugs that help her to live with arthritis. When she doesn't have regular injections, the results can be devastating.
I also experience really bad fatigue and brain fog. So basically it means that I can't function.
And that's what happened when recently one of her deliveries was delayed by a month. She's back on the right drugs now, but still living with some of the symptoms.
Now I'm in a situation where we no longer know if the drugs that had been keeping my arthritis in remission are working. Potentially we're going to have to rethink my treatment plan. And this is all because of scientists not delivering my medicine when they should have.
Sciences is a company contracted by the NHS to deliver vital medicines to people with long-term health conditions. After being placed into special measures 2 years ago by the health regulator, it has since been rated as good. But that's not a word 23-year-old Jacob would use.
How can I trust a company with my life if I can't even, trust them to get a delivery to me?
Jacob has a bowel disease called Crohn's. In February, his medication was delivered 4 days late and he's still suffering physical side effects. Sciences wrote to Jacob to apologise for that, but on the day we visited, it got worse.
12 days until I'm due to inject and they've closed my account entirely, which is just bringing my worst nightmares to truth.
Jacob says he was told on the phone that his account had been deleted. Sciences told us today the account was still open and that Jacob has now had his latest delivery. But the anxiety and stress it's caused him is taking a visible toll.
I've already seen what happens only a few days delay with my medication. I'm incapable of doing anything. It's got me thinking in the mind state that life isn't worth living again. That's what they've done to me. They've made me an empty shell of myself.
And Jacob and Sam aren't the only ones suffering. We looked at hundreds of reviews of Sciences on the NHS website and found that 83% of patients only gave it 1 star. In a statement, Sciences told us, "We're very sorry if any patients have faced delays. In cases where patients have concerns, we have a range of support services, including a priority helpline and same-day emergency dispensing." But according to this NHS doctor, it's not just those patients that are being let down. How much strain is this putting on the NHS?
This puts a strain on the NHS that the NHS really doesn't need at the moment. People in the clinical team, nurses, NHS administrators that should be doing other things to deliver people's care are now being tied up chasing a delivery company.
The Care Quality Commission is now considering whether to take further regulatory action against Sciences, a company that continues to cause pain, stress and worry to the people it's supposed to support. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
New guidance issued today for grassroots sports clubs says that anyone who suffers a suspected concussion shouldn't return to action for at least 21 days. Following a consultation, the government says that any athlete suspected of suffering a concussion should be removed from the field of play immediately. Players, parents and coaches are being asked to make sure they know the signs of concussion and know what to do if anyone suffers an injury. As the sharp-witted but ultimately flawed Vesper Lynd in Casino Royale, Ava Green earned her place in the hearts of James Bond fans. The doomed sci-fi production A Patriot may not ever have proved such a hit, but it certainly made headlines. The film was cancelled, and today, at the end of a bitter court battle, Green was awarded $1 million fee for it. Vindicated, the actress said her reputation had been upheld in the face of bully boy tactics.
It's a plan. I got the impression we were risking millions of dollars and hundreds of lives on a game of luck. What else can you surmise, Mr. Bond?
Ava Green made her name starring alongside Daniel Craig as Vesper Lynd in the Bond film Casino Royale. The French actress took centre stage at the High Court in January over an abandoned sci-fi film about climate change. Today, Judge Mr. Justice Michael Green ruled she was still entitled to her $1 million fee and dismissed a counterclaim by the production company White Lantern Films and its financial backers. Ava Green said justice had prevailed in an Instagram post that read, "In this legal action, I was forced to stand up to a small group of men funded by deep financial resources who tried to use me as a scapegoat to cover up their own mistakes. I am proud that I stood up against their bully boy tactics. They made false allegations about me in public court documents, which the judge has now shown are totally incorrect." During the 11-day trial, White Lantern Films had attempted to portray Green as a diva who made excessive creative and financial demands and had tried to sink the production. But the judge said she didn't renounce her obligations or commit any repudiatory breaches of it.
It is quite common that the producers like to place the blame or like to defer the blame away from themselves. But ultimately, if you're going to make a film, you need to have the money to make a film. And it's incredibly frustrating when production companies fold and try and find a little way around it that basically puts the blame on our members, who are ultimately just turning up to do a job and be engaged in a film that they would hope would be able to pay them for that work that they've done.
You are beautiful.
The Hollywood stars described the legal process as painful and damaging. White Lantern Film and SMC Speciality Finance say the suggestion their legal action was motivated by or represented gender-based bullying is completely unwarranted, and they're considering whether to appeal. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
The Prince and Princess of Wales made their first visit to Aberfan today. The Welsh village was the site of the tragic 1966 landslide in which 144 people were killed, including 116 school children. It was said to be an emotional visit for Prince William and Kate, who met a survivor of the disaster and went to the Aberfan Memorial Garden. There were also lighter moments during the visit, though. Among the cheering crowds was one-year-old Daniel, who cheekily pinched the Princess of Wales's handbag. He was allowed to play with it for a few minutes before the item was eventually returned to its rightful owner. And finally, over the course of its 130-year history, royalty and Hollywood stars have been among those to grace the cover of Vogue magazine, the Princess of Wales and Ava Green, to name but two. In that time, there have been revolutions in style and culture. Now British Vogue is reframing fashion again with 5 disabled cover stars, among them consulting editor Sinead Burke, who lives with dwarfism. She told us of her pride at being involved in the edition, but said on the issue of representation, there's still work to do.
It's a magazine that's influenced fashion and culture for more than a century. Back then, the editor dedicated it to the ceremonial side of life. Except it was never dedicated to the life of those living with disabilities until now, as British Vogue is releasing special editions featuring disabled models like Sinead Burke.
I'm really proud to be part of this issue. But to also be in the room in which decisions were made is truly remarkable. But remarkable only in the fact that it is progress and that there is still so much more work to do.
What impact would it have had on you as a child if you saw someone who looked like you on the front cover of Vogue?
When I was in my teenage years, I would have done anything to see that representation. And I think about younger and older generations who may, for the first time, lower the volume of the voice in their head that tells them that they're not good enough. It asks a broader question. Visibility is much needed. We need systemic change. We need things that are not just moments, but are part of the consistency and the fabric of the world we live in.
And this is how she hopes that'll happen, in a campaign that aims to get adaptive clothing on the same racks as some of the biggest brands, with editions of the magazine available in Braille for the first time too.
As a disability majority team that worked on this project, that brought it to life from digital accessibility to making it available in Braille for the first time, for there to be an audible version, for us to have multiple disabilities. And I think a part of me wants to sit with the physical product, flick through every page, probably sniff it really weirdly. Yeah. And
I smell them too.
And to just feel that it's real.
The focus of these new editions is to bring beauty and accessibility together, hoping to change what the world of modelling looks like so that this version includes everyone. Sangeeta Lal, News at 10.
And that's it for tonight. Have a really fantastic bank holiday weekend. I will see you next week. For now, good night. Thanks for watching.